Hey everyone, it's Year Peacekeeper coming at you with the how to play video for the German Tier 1 cruiser Hermelin. Actually, this really isn't going to be much of a how to play video considering the ship didn't actually exist and it's a Tier 1 ship. So I'm not going to talk about tactics and whatnot in the battle video because let's face it, these ships you're going to go over, it's going to be over so fast it's not even really all that important. So we will briefly cover the history of this and then we are going to dive right on into the battle video after we go over our stats. That way we can talk a little bit more about how high-tier German cruisers play and the reasons why I disagree with the assertion that the ships like Hindenburg need to be buffed. So let's dive right on into Hermelin, shall we? As a Tier 1 cruiser, she has 4,500 hit points, and really, cruiser is probably not the right word for it. The ship was originally designed to be kind of similar to the Erie in the fact that it was going to be kind of a harbor patrol boat. It was originally intended to defend, coastal waters, a littoral combat ship for those of you who are into hardcore naval terms. Basically, the ship was a sloop. It was, a small gunboat. It really only served that purpose, and it was of the original design was called the Colonial Gunboat 1939. 8 were planned, none were ever built because, surprise, World War II, and the Germans felt that they had better things to build at the time, which I'm sure they probably thought was a good idea at the time. That and the fact that Germany pretty much lost all of its colonies, during the design process of all this. So, not much in the way of colonies to try and defend there. So, yes, 4,500 hit points for this gunboat, the start of the cruisers. 35 millimeters of armor, though. Woo! The main battery consists of 2 dual 128 millimeter guns, one fore, one aft. They have a 9.9 kilometer firing range. That's without basic firing training. Please don't run 19-point captains on your Tier 1 ships. That's a bit insane. 4-second reload time, and the guns fire sufficiently fast and they're sufficiently accurate. This ship does have quite a healthy anti-aircraft complement, including those 5-inch guns. They are in dual-purpose mounts. You'll see those dual-purpose mounts again on a certain subset of destroyers in the German line, and they also kind of suspiciously look like secondaries on some other ships. Yeah. Anyway, max speed of 24 knots, which is absolutely impressive for a Tier 1 cruiser. 360 meter turning radius, 3.3 second rudder shift time, 8.4K detection range by sea, and you'll never see any aircraft at Tier 1, but it's 6K for those of you who are just absolutely dying and curious. In terms of the upgrades, well, you'll see I'm not running one, but this first slot is pretty much always going to end up being main armaments mod 1, possibly auxiliary armaments mod 1. It just kind of depends on what your goals are when playing them, but being as it's a Tier 1 and it requires basically no experience to get to Tier 2, I don't bother putting any on there. Anyway, in terms of gameplay style, it's a Tier 1. And it only has HE, and you can't use premium consumables, so yeah, go play it and have fun. In terms of German cruisers overall, well, we're going to talk more about that in the battle video. Alright, so the gameplay style of high-tier German cruisers is quite simple. They are some of the best support cruisers in the game, and they are best played, well, it's hard to really pin down one area that they're best played as, because, quite honestly, different ships in the line play better at different ranges, at different scenarios, different circumstances. The overwhelming majority of the ships have very strong armor piercing and very mediocre HE, and that can definitely lead to some interesting problems because for most cruiser captains, they are absolutely incapable of switching from HE. This is not the line for you then. If that's the case, you should probably go play the Japanese line or maybe the French line. I hear the French line has pretty good HE. Anyway, the AP on high-tier German cruisers is situational. much like most things, the HE is terrible. I mean, it's not, don't get me wrong here. I mean, the HE is definitely workable. Hindenburg's HE is actually quite strong for how fast its rate of fire is. Fire chances reasonable, damage is reasonable, but Hindenburg and the German cruiser's real strength lies in the armor piercing. And it's not like US armor piercing or Royal Navy, the British armor piercing, where it gets favorable auto bounce angles. In fact, actually, it's actually quite normal in that regard. And it's not like they have the most energy when they get there, but they do have pretty good penetration values. And they seem to do a lot of frickin' damage. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I have caught a broadside battleship at, I don't know, 12, 15k and lopped off 10 to 15k in damage. And that is definitely a strong suit of the German line. And that's not to say that their AP is, like, super amazing. I mean, it is. It really is quite good. It's not battleship. Well, I can't even say that with a straight face because I call the Hindenburg battleship Hindenburg for a reason. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things you have to, when you catch a ship broadside, you have to punish them with the AP on it, on these cruisers, because it is just so strong, and that's going to pick up, it's Tier 2, definitely not. Tier 3, not so much. I'm sure by the time we hit Tier 4, AP starts being a real big thing for German cruisers, and it's definitely worth having, and definitely worth using frequently. So the key is going to be understanding positioning on a map, putting yourself in a position to exploit ships that are broadside to you. If you're good at playing ships with a fairly high level of strategic mindset, with a high level of strategic gameplay, it's very easy for you to exploit enemy ships and their broadsides for free citadels. Battleships, not free citadels, but you will definitely get a lot of very high damage rolls, to the tune of, 8,000+ damage. And actually, I have citadeled, ironically enough, I citadeled a Grosser Kurfürst at like 19k at the start of a match in Hindenburg. I don't know how. Shells landed in like the perfect place to pen, and I guess they had just enough pen to make it through. I don't know what exactly happened there, but one thing is certain, the AP, when it makes a good solid connection with the broadside of a ship, is absolutely devastating, and it's not something to be underestimated by any stretch of the imagination. You would be crazy to avoid using it on these ships, given how bad, relatively, the HE is compared to other nations' HE. And again, it's not that the HE is like completely awful, it's just that the HE on German cruisers has lower overall damage and pretty weak fire starting chances, and so it's not super amazing to use all the time like you would on, say, the Japanese cruisers, where you would be a fool to use anything but AP, except for, even in the case of the Japanese, the AP is still quite strong against broadside targets. Now, what the Germans do really, really well comes primarily from the choice of armor scheme. Like the German battleships, most of the German cruisers have some form of turtleback configuration for their armor, and as a result, they do benefit from close-in dueling with the other cruisers in the game, and they do have torpedoes to deal with the odd battleship that happens to pop up. The problem is they generally have weaker belt armor as a result, and, well, if you are unfortunate and they happen to aim just a smidge lower than you were anticipating, or you happen to be turning at the time and exposing that soft underside, you will get deleted rather quickly. But at longer ranges, generally speaking, they have decent enough armor to, if you're angled, to mitigate receiving too many citadels. Now, there are exceptions to this. Obviously, you're going to run into problems with the lower tier ships, the protected cruisers with long-range fire, and you will to an extent with some of the mid-range stuff as well. But overall, German cruisers are very durable. They are usually pretty well-rounded, and they have very good anti-aircraft, owing to the fact that the vast majority of their anti-aircraft is concentrated in high-caliber dual-purpose gun mounts, which means their AA benefits heavily from having manual fire control for AA, which we talked about in the Captain Skills video before this, from last week. And so I really have to say that overall I really enjoy the gameplay of the German cruisers. It's challenging in the fact that if you're not in a good position, if you're not somebody who is good with positioning on a map, you will most likely struggle to perform with these ships until you can figure that out. And to figure that out, I highly recommend playing US battleships, because if there was ever a line that is punished quite heavily by bad positioning, it's definitely the US battleship line. But yeah, you definitely need to be cognizant of your positioning at all times. You need to be taking advantage of enemies' mistakes. But if you happen to catch a broadside cruiser, boy, hold on, because the damage rolls are going to be insane. I have 2-shot full health Mogamis in a Hindenburg by just hitting them with that many citadels while they were broadside. And it happens so fast because the reload on Hindenburg is so good. It's comical. It's legitimately hilarious how badly people underestimate the German cruisers at higher tiers. And Hipper is another good example of this. She's not the world's best tier 8 cruiser, but she does have very strong AP, and like Hindenburg, can utilize that to great effect. And so most of the German cruisers are going to play that way. Certainly the ones that I have played, both on test servers and in-game in the live, they have played very well with their AP, and again, you need to be able to put yourself in a position on map to make sure you have lots of broadside targets. Once you do that, you shouldn't have too many problems doing large amounts of damage and getting large amounts of kills. And of course, you have torpedoes on most of these ships to take advantage of people who get just too close. So, all the advantages of a Japanese cruiser with well, you still have some disadvantages. There's not any polite way to put that. Yeah. Anyway, I do really enjoy the German cruisers, and as you guys know, Hindenburg is by far one of my favorite tier 10 cruisers. It really is a very strong ship when played correctly, and it is very durable. And, oh, hey, sunk that Black Swan there. But, yeah, I mean, I don't feel that many of these ships need buffs. There's a couple of them that probably do, and I think the vast majority of players are trying to play them using HE too much. And like I said, the HE, it works at the higher tiers, it's okay, but it should not be relied upon to do reliable damage. If you've got a broadside target, you need to switch to AP and watch the damage rolls go up in order to really take advantage of these ships. And they are fantastic cruiser killers. In fact, the only cruisers that they will really struggle with are probably US cruisers that are played by competent captains because of the auto bounce angles. The light cruisers, not so much, but the heavy cruisers, definitely. Royal Navy cruisers are probably a little bit of a challenge because of their stealth and their ability to, launch torpedoes as well as have smoke. German cruisers do get hydro and defensive fire, but they do not get radar at any tier. So you do not get radar in this line, and you are limited, therefore, to hydro. And hydro's range, while amazing for hydroacoustic search, is not that good compared to radar, especially at the higher tier. So using it is far more risky. That's not to say that it doesn't have its uses, it's just more situational. I tend to run defensive fire pretty much all the time. If I had the option to select at the beginning of a match, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wargaming, I would most definitely then pick, obviously, based upon carriers, whether or not a carrier is in the match. Other things to talk about with the German cruisers, the large majority of these ships were real, which is nice. It's not like the Russians. We only have really, I think, 3 paper ships in the entire line. Hermelin is 1, Rune, and Hindenburg. All the rest, I think, were real, so that's always a good sign. They do have an interesting playstyle. These ships are fantastic kiting cruisers, which, if you're not familiar with kiting for cruiser gameplay, basically what you're doing is you are getting the attention of enemy cruisers and then running away. That sounds wrong. That sounds something, you know, I hate to be cliche, but that sounds something like what the French would do. But really, if you look at the gun configuration for a lot of the cruisers, they have more guns in the rear than in the front, and I forget what the reasoning was. It was explained in one of the forum things. I think it had something to do with German naval doctrine at the time for their cruisers as commerce raiders was basically to engage and then flee. Well, that tactic definitely works well for them in this game, and they do play, like I said, decent long-range support ships. Their AP still does a fairly decent amount of damage at longer ranges. Their HE is okay at longer ranges. Their maneuverability is really where they get a lot of their strength, and the outright amount of protection they get from that turtleback armor scheme that you pick up, you know, at tier 4, if I remember correctly, is very potent. It cannot be underestimated by any stretch of the imagination, especially in close-in cruiser fights. You will absolutely destroy a cruiser at close range if torpedoes are not involved, and they expose even a modicum of their broadside for your armor piercing to penetrate through. That is definitely something that catches a lot of people off guard because, like I said, it is really quite strong. These ships are really quite strong when played that way. And that is difficult play to really maximize, and that's part of my motivation for doing the How to Play series on them, because I really feel like the vast majority of people underplay these ships, and I don't mean that to sound rude or elitist. It's just that it's not a play style that most people are used to playing in. It's not like a battleship where you can just, you know, it's not like the battleships where you can sail broadside and are basically immune to any incoming citadels. That's just not the case, but anyway, enough of me rambling on about the German cruisers. You know, next week we're going to pick up with the Tier 2, and that should definitely bring upon more detailed how to play stuff. Anyway, I'm your Peacekeeper. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for watching.